Hello everyone, welcome back to House of BLU. I'm Bear, one of the hosts, and this is the first episode in my visual art series, The Vault. In this series, I'm going to be breaking down different art techniques, both traditional and digital. Things that I've learned since I could hold a pencil, as well as things I've professionally studied. Skills that have enhanced my pieces, and things I've read about, tried, and failed in. In this video, I'm going to be talking about inking. Inking is my favorite art form. 95% of my teenage art pieces were black ink on a white background. I love detail, and color always seems to make this detail overly bold or messy. These days, when I add color, I only use one if the piece features black ink. If I'm doing a full color piece, I don't use black at all. For me, it's either one or the other. There are a few different ways you can use ink. A lot of people use the Sakura Micron ballpoint pens or other black ink pens. I used to use them before I moved on to dip pens and quill tips. Ballpoint pens are great for when you're starting out or if you're already used to them, or if you're traveling because they are much more portable. However, they are quite expensive when you have to continuously purchase them, and they run out quite easily. A lot of ballpoint pens aren't waterproof as well, which depends on the artist's preference, but these days I only use waterproof ink because I never know where a piece is going to take me. I like to know that if I suddenly decide I want to add watercolor, I can. Or if for whatever reason I accidentally spill water on whatever I'm working on, which actually has happened more often than not, it's going to be somewhat okay because the ink won't bleed. Some people like to use brushes with ink. It's common practice in Eastern style art for calligraphy, trees, landscapes, mountains, flowers, and human outlines to be painted in ink with a brush. When I lived in China, I had a beautiful set of calligraphy brushes I bought from my favorite art shop in Olympic Square. The woman at the shop offered me lessons, but our schedules didn't match up, which is sad because if I could go back, there are 100% things I could have changed or stopped to make time for art lessons from a master calligrapher. I did spend a lot of time in the shop though, and she did teach me a lot of art theory, and a lot of old art stories are ones that I know from her. Her favorite thing to paint was water, something I avoid like the plague. She had perfected her technique and style though, because every piece I saw was amazing. I guess this is the part where I would add photos I'd taken, but I didn't have a smartphone until I came back to Australia. So I don't have many photos, if any, of my adventures. I don't use brushes and pens these days though. For almost a year now, I've been using dip pens and waterproof ink. Using ink in this way allows the artist to utilize continuity in pigment and allows texture and detail to come from the thickness, textures, and details of the lines themselves. See, when you use brushes and pens, there's a way to shade detail as the ink runs out. Personally, I like all the ink on my page to be bold and highly pigmented. Basically, by using dip pens and waterproof ink, the color is darker and smoother than if I used ink pens. When using dip pens, I always use a watercolor technique, which is to have a piece of paper next to you for color testing before placing the medium on your canvas. In this case, I draw a couple of lines out before working on my piece because I've noticed that over time there is a buildup of dried ink which interferes with the intake process of liquid, which can then lead to ink leaking, exploding, or bleeding onto the page. I'm using 3 tips for this piece. The first is a flathead tip, which is used a lot in calligraphy for the thicker lines. And I'll also be using the princess nib as well for the middle thickness, and then the finest nib I have for the smaller details. There are a few other nibs that I want to buy, but to start out, I bought a mixed medium set for about $80. I used my birthday money last year to buy them and a pot of Indian ink. I was so excited because I'd seen a few of my favorite art YouTubers using this technique for ink. For the first 3 or so months, I sucked. I couldn't get the pressure right, and the ink would often just yeet itself out onto the page, not where I wanted it to be. But with practice, I started getting there. My dip ink process is still not as good as, say, with a ballpoint pen, but I know with more practice, it will overtake my skill with pens and all in all look more professional. A lot of people ask me where I come up with things to draw. I like to draw and paint a lot of surrealism, patterns, and architecture, so this piece is quite simple compared to that. I've drawn 2 characters and a protection sigil I found on Pinterest. The character on the left is my spirit guide, Tashi, and the one on the right is Lou's spirit guide, who we have named Susan because I can't pronounce her mother tongue name. It's a long story, but basically we ended up with demons in our house around the filming of this video. But it's okay because they're gone now and I've made a spell jar. Anyways, it was the first time in a long time I'd seen Tashi fight because we both have protector spirit guides. I'd forgotten he had 2 swords, and obviously I'd never seen Susan fight, but she's an archer with perfect aim. The two work well together, which is really a reflection of Lou and I as well. I don't know much about Susan, only that she is of Greek origin, made of gold particles and energy, and she knew Lou in one of her past lives. Tashi and I, on the other hand, go way back. I've seen Tashi since before conscious memory. Mum tells stories of how we would play for hours, how they would come everywhere with us, and I would strap them into the car because, safety first. When I was a kid, they were covered in rainbow clothes and hats and were gender fluid, but these days, Tashi is just they, them. There is now a whiskey addiction, and the only rainbow clothing they wear are the colourful stripy harem pants you see in this piece. I should probably point out that I'm not left-handed. The way I filmed this episode and the next one, it's flipped my hands, so I will find a way for episode 3 to set up the camera differently. I think there are a few things I would have changed if I was to draw this piece again. I think it would have added to the piece more if I'd done the background in a watered down ink with a brush. I know I said 5 seconds ago that I like all the ink pigments in my piece to be saturated, but the thing is about art, you never know where you're going to end up. Anyways, this is the end of episode 1. If you have any questions or recommendation of artsy things to try, please comment down below and subscribe to be notified of the next House of BLU video. Have a lovely day. Bear out.